Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain. We are nerdy for the birdies. We're moving through the free agency period and now we're on to the draft, as we're pretty much a month away from the draft. So from here on out it's going to be pretty much content related to the draft. I plan on doing draft preview stuff for position groups, and I also plan on doing mock drafts starting next week. So today we're going to preview the tight end position. Now, there's a lot of stuff about the Eagles tight ends in the news and who may be on the team, who may not be. But considering that pretty much every tight end on the roster right now is not scheduled to be on the roster beyond this year, I expect the Eagles are going to draft one. So I compiled some guys that I ended up watching, kind of evaluating on my own. Tight ends are one of my favorite positions to watch. And throughout this draft class, which I think is a pretty strong class. This is not every tight end in the class. I just kind of focused on a group that I think are realistic targets for the Eagles. So in case you're wondering, I'm not going to talk about Tyler Warren, and I'm not going to talk about Colston Loveland. Loveland in recent weeks has kind of become semi-realistic. I just don't really see tight end as a first-round pick for the Eagles. They don't really typically do that. And on top of that, I just don't think they're going to trade up for one either. So I just didn't really want to waste my time watching those guys, even though I really love Tyler Warren, one of my favorite players in this class. Instead, I really wanted to focus on guys that I do think the Eagles will draft, or could draft per se. So some of them are guys that the Eagles have met up with during this draft process, and some of them are guys that the Eagles have not talked to, and they're just ones I'm interested in. But anyway, I have a list here. Let's get into it. Our tight end one here is Mason Taylor. Not necessarily tight end one of the class, but our first tight end we're going to look at. And Mason Taylor is the kind of tight end that you go after if, you're looking for someone to directly replace Goddard. He has some of the similar chops that Goddard has. When you look at tight ends in that position, you really have three types. You have your pure receiver, your pure blocking, and then the ones that do it all. Your pure receivers are guys that are essentially like big slots. Your Brock Bowers is, your Kyle Pitts, even Grant Calcaterra for the Eagles. Guys that aren't really the best blockers, but they're really good size advantages. They use their speed, their size to kind of get leverage against corners and other defenders they may go up against in the slot. They're not necessarily lined up in line or in the Y position, but they're more, they're really good receiving weapons. So that's kind of what they do. And then you have blockers that are more like that sixth offensive lineman type. Your Mercedes Lewis, or when the Eagles had Jack Stoll, the guys that would just, they don't get a ton of receiving production, but they will block their butts off, and they're really good in the run game. And then you have your guys that do it all. Your George Kittles is like a great example. Sam Laporta. And obviously you have Dallas Goedert, who I think is kind of that do-it-all type, and his value is great for this offense. Mason Taylor is more of that latter option. He is very much a kind of a do-it-all guy. He can block, he can catch. When I say these guys can block in this class, rookie tight ends typically aren't the best at blocking, but if they have certain traits, certain things about them, you can line them up in line or in the Y position, aka just right off the tackle, very tight to the formation. That's typically where the Y tight end is. You can do that in college. You can pretty much be considered good enough to block, because a lot of times tight ends can't. When you have a tight end, you have to be able to block edge rushers, and you have to block linebackers at times. And Mason Taylor can do that, and he's a really nice receiver. He can get open in space, he can move, he doesn't look stiff running routes. It's hard to really watch route running for tight ends in college as well, and I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm kind of using Mason Taylor to preview the position a little bit in the draft class, because a lot of times the tight ends are running very quick routes, and when they do get more explosive plays, you do watch that. When they get blocking reps, you watch that. Is he like an elite blocker? Not necessarily, but I think he's a good enough blocker that he could develop into something similar to what the Eagles had in Goddard. Anyway, so really like Mason Taylor out of LSU. He's someone I think that would probably go mid to early second round. So probably somewhere between the 30s to like maybe the 50s. So the Eagles would have to most likely trade back or trade up to take him, but he's someone I really enjoy watching in this class. He's my personal draft crush at the position. He's someone I really wish the Eagles could take. Anyway, we'll move on to our next tight end, Elijah Arroyo from Miami, obviously the tight end for Cam Ward. This is one that the Eagles did not talk to. I did mention the Eagles have talked to Mason Taylor that I know of this point in time. So if there were meetings or whatnot that I haven't seen or reported anywhere, obviously I just didn't know at this point in time. But I really wanted to watch him, and he's a really good tight end. More as a receiver than blocker. Can he block? Like, a little bit, I would say. He's not the best blocking tight end, but he's very explosive. He had great chemistry with Cam Ward. Good route runner, smooth, fluid, things you really want to see for the position. Because a lot of times with tight ends, because a lot of them aren't really great route runners, they look stiff moving down the field. They can't really separate. Arroyo could separate. He's got good speed at the position. He's someone I think is like mid round 2 to like early round 3ish, maybe even mid round 3. But I do think he's a pretty good tight end. He's probably the 4th best overall in this class, in my opinion. And I definitely think he'd be a fun target. Again, he would be more replacing the Calcaterra type of tight end, more so than a pure Goddard. But I think he could develop into a little bit better of a blocker than Calcaterra. Then we have Terrence Ferguson, who I think is another do-it-all tight end. I think he's a mid-round 3, early round 4 kind of guy. This is someone the Eagles have talked to. He plays for Oregon, and it was fun kind of watching him. He would have reps where he would go down the field and make explosive catches and plays. There were other times where he was at the line of scrimmage. He was told, you got to go chip defensive ends, or you even have to block defensive ends. I got to watch him go up against Abdul Carter a little bit. And while I don't think he necessarily outright was like an elite shutdown tight end blocking him, I definitely think he did his job to keep Carter away from Dylan Gabriel, and I thought he looked good enough as a blocker. I think he had developmental traits, so definitely more of that do-it-all type. Nice, tall, fast tight end. I believe he was the fastest at the combine. I don't think he's the fastest of this class. We'll get to who I think it is later. But I think just a really fluid guy, good route runner as well. So I definitely think that like this would be a decent replacement. This is kind of the guy I look at is, if you don't get Mason Taylor, take Terrence Ferguson. I think that's the kind of guy you want. And we'll move on to the Texas tight end, Gunnar Helm, who is, I think, more of a pure receiving type tight end. Really was a good receiving tight end for Texas, a big weapon for their offense, and that says a lot with all the weapons they have. I do think he can block, but again, I don't think it's his strength. Again, a lot of rookie tight ends aren't great at it. I mean, at some point, every tight end will be asked to do it, but I do think that he's a pretty good receiver. This is more late, round 3, round 4-ish, so similar spot as Ferguson. But again, if you want more of that pure receiving profile, that's where he would be. I think it would be a solid option, and I believe the Eagles also did talk to him. And we'll move on to our 5th tight end, Jake Brittingstall from Clemson. He's actually an interesting tight end to watch. He kind of weirdly reminds me of Johnny Wilson, but in some ways a better version of Johnny Wilson. Kind of this long, lean body that's like very tall. They're actually very similar heights. He's a little bit of a do-it-all, but I think he's like one of those jack-of-all-trades but a master of none. Like, I don't think he's like an exceptionally great blocker, but I don't think he's like an exceptionally great receiver. He's got good traits, and he's more of a pure developmental type, so I definitely think he's like a pure day 3 kind of guy. But again, if you want more of those kind of packages and body type, especially for somebody for the red zone, we saw the Eagles try to get Johnny Wilson, who admittedly is a wide receiver, a lot of red zone targets this year, and it didn't really work. Maybe Brittingstall is someone you could try to do that with, and maybe kind of balance that out a little bit, kind of use his size against people. But yeah, I think he's a solid add. Again, a day 3 kind of guy, but a fun guy to add to the position room. Number 6, we have Oronde Gadsden II from Syracuse, and this was someone originally I didn't have in my video, but I saw people talking about him recently, and I decided, you know what, I want to take a look at him. He wasn't someone the Eagles had personally talked to as of right now, but he was somebody that I was really curious to know more about, and watching him on film, he's pretty electric to kind of watch. He's kind of this shifty, quick tight end, explosive, can make big plays down the field. And I also think he's a decent blocker. He's kind of that do-it-all type. And I feel like, you know, you get to day 3, if the Eagles have prioritized other needs, and you say, we still need our tight end, Mason Taylor's gone, Terrence Ferguson's gone, even Brennistol's gone, I would take Oronde Gadsden, and I like him. He's a really quick tight end. I think he is the fastest tight end in this class. You see it on film as well. Unlike our next tight end that I'm going to talk about in our last one, I just think he's an explosive guy. And while I think the guy behind him is one that I think will go before him, I think he's kind of that sneaky kind of steal if he goes to the right team, depending on what that team may be. And lastly, our last tight end is Harold Fannin Jr. Now, this is a tight end that kind of made waves amongst Eagles fans when the Eagles hired, I should say, Scott Loeffler as their QB coach. He was the head coach of Bowling Green, where Harold Fannin was the tight end. So obviously, when people get hired from certain organizations, people try to say, like, okay, maybe they're going to try to go after some of their guys, and here's Fannin. And Fannin had a lot of receiving production in this class. That's for sure. I'm not as high on Harold Fannin as a lot of Eagles fans are. I mean, I've seen people taking him as early as like the 3rd round, and I think that's way too early. I think he's definitely a day 3 guy. Big thing for me is I don't see great separation. I don't see like elite. I don't see like great route running. And people talked about him, and the comp I've heard is Jonnu Smith, and I don't see Jonnu Smith. He kind of weirdly reminds me more of Kyle Pitts, but not in a good way. He reminds me of Kyle Pitts more so post his knee injury, where his route running's more awkward. He's kind of lumbering and big, and he's more of a strider than a fast guy. And I remember when he ran his combine, you know, people were a little upset with the time. They thought he'd be faster. But when I kind of watched it in game, I kind of agreed with the time. I don't think he's necessarily a fast guy. I think he's just, because he's so big, he's kind of more of a strider. Not a great separator. He just caught a lot of, in my opinion, more jump balls kind of plays, and sometimes he was just left alone wide open, and then he would get catches that way. I just don't see like the explosiveness, and he is not a great blocker at all. I just didn't really see many great blocking reps for him. And especially for someone his size, you kind of would hope would be a better blocker. So that's why I've kind of ranked him down here. Everything I think people think Harold Fannin is really what I think Oronde Gadsden is. And that's someone I'd rather have. I would be happy with Fannin. Like, I think he'd be a solid guy if he took him like late day 3. But I do think there's better options in this class. And there's plenty of other tight ends, ones the Eagles talked to, ones that they didn't in this class that they could go after as well. We don't know. But this is just the first of our draft preview, so if you guys liked it, leave a comment. I have a couple positions in mind for what I'm going to do next, to talk about next on this channel. But if you guys have one in particular you'd like me to talk about, let me know in the comments. Anyways, this is Bird Brain. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy for the birdies. Fly, Eagles, fly. See you around.